morning and welcome to Morning Movie News, where once again there is so much movie news in play that I had to make some difficult decisions about what stories made the cut for today's episode. I hope you like the stories that I did pick, and I kind of cheated as I combined two of them into the first story so that I could get more movie news into the episode. But also rest assured that if I didn't cover a story today, it is still on my radar and I'll try to get to it later this week. However, that being said, if there is a movie news story that you really want to discuss and you don't see it discussed here today, just let me know about it in the comments down below, and I will most certainly make an extra special effort to try and get to it later this week. And now speaking of your requests, something a lot of you have been asking me about for the past few days actually is Wonder Woman, and that's going to be the first story, or actually half of the first story, because as I said, I combined two into one, but they're related. So what have you been asking me about Wonder Woman? Well, it was revealed by Gal Gadot herself, Wonder Woman, the actual Wonder Woman, that in the upcoming Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice, Wonder Woman will not fly, she will leap. And I think on the surface, that's sort of disappointing. I think leaping is obviously the poor man's flying, and they certainly have the budget to make a character fly because Superman's flying all over the place. However, I have to say, while this news is initially disappointing, I don't think it's game over for the character by any means. And I'm going to give the benefit of the doubt to Zack Snyder, Chris Terrio, and the rest of the creative team over at Warner Brothers working on the DC Cinematic Universe that they've made this decision not lightly, and that it's an organic decision that fits in with the rest of what they're trying to build. So what could possibly be a legitimate reason for Wonder Woman not being able to fly? Well, as you might have noticed, I'm sure you've noticed, DC is trying to make their films not just dark and gritty, but very realistic. There's a fantasy element at play over at Marvel and a comedic element, whereas at DC, I think they're really trying to make it seem what it would be like if these superheroes actually did exist in the real world, which I like. I think there needs to be a distinction between the two cinematic universes, and I like the way it's been divided. I like that Marvel is fantasy and humor, mostly, and a brighter color palette, etc. And I like that DC is the opposite. I like the realistic aspect to it. It's something that's also a distinction when you read their comics. Now, of course, they could both, dip into the other side a little bit, but I think overall, this tone and approach has worked for both brands for a very long time in the comics, so I see no reason it can't be carried over into the movies. So that being said, I think that when they're trying to make a very realistic story here, they could look at Wonder Woman from an outsider's perspective and the perspective of your mainstream moviegoer and say, well, look, why can Wonder Woman fly, but none of the other Amazons can? I mean, that makes no sense. Now, of course, if you are familiar with the character of Wonder Woman, you know that she has gifts from the gods, and that she's the champion of the Amazons. She wins that right to represent them in man's world. So, she's different than the other Amazons. Also, she's made of clay, or in her current incarnation, she was wished to life by her mother, Hippolyta. And then in her current thing, she is, one of Zeus's illegitimate kids with Hippolyta. So there are reasons that she has a different power set than the other members of her community. Now, the other thing is, on a side note here, talking about, parentage and, ancestry, etc., with this choice, I think it's clear that they're not going to go the route that some of us thought they might, and that the Amazons are descendants of Kryptonians. Because, of course, they had those scouting parties that were revealed in Man of Steel, and, Clark Kent, or Kal-El, finds one of the scouting party ships, and it's hinted at, and there's an open pod, hinted at the fact that there's a Kryptonian that was on Earth a long time before him. What happened to that Kryptonian? Did they start, a race of Amazons, per se? I think that's a great idea. However, you would think that natural selection would choose flight. Why would that be breeded out of Kryptonians over the centuries or decades or whatever the time span is? You could say maybe that's what happens when you mix a Kryptonian with a human. They only can leap. That could be interesting. But then does that mean all of the Amazons can leap? You have like a whole island of leaping frogs. I don't know. I think that the Amazons are not a particularly realistic idea, so if you start to try and inject realism into Wonder Woman, I wonder what you're going to end up with at the end of the day. If you strip her of her Greek mythology, etc., I don't really know what's left of the character besides just being kind of like a female 300 character, which, Zack Snyder is very familiar with because that's his franchise. That's one way to go with Wonder Woman, but I think that she needs her background. I think that you could do some very interesting stuff with Greek mythology and the character. And then also, there's the big question as to whether or not it's still Wonder Woman if you take that away. I'm open to suggestions here. They made a lot of changes with Superman, and while I didn't think that I would like them, and I didn't like all of them, some of the ideas they introduced I thought were good and were interesting, and I was willing to play with them. So again, not a game over situation, just one that makes you now, I think, approach the film with even a little bit more trepidation than some of us already were. We'll see. I think Suicide Squad is much better shape than this film, Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. But hopefully we'll be pleasantly surprised with both of them. So I'm just curious to know, what do you think of the idea of Wonder Woman not being able to fly? I think that also kind of hurts her relationship with Superman, because she's supposed to be the one person on the planet Earth, or near the planet Earth, that he can relate to, because they're pretty much equals. They're kind of equals, not just in their power sets, but in, being isolated from their people, etc., but still looking human. And while initially I didn't like the Superman-Wonder Woman romance, I think that some of the writers, particularly Peter Tomasi recently, have done a nice job exploring that sameness in them, and also what makes them very different, that they do have very different ideologies in the way they approach life and superheroing. So I think there's a lot of interesting things at play here. And I think if you take anything away from this conversation this morning, it would be that I think that we should be open to different ideas being injected into these characters. And I think that that kind of freshness is something that the DC Cinematic Universe needs, particularly because I think that they've had so many bad starts. I think that, at Marvel, you're like, hey, the comics are a great blueprint, just follow that. But I think DC, and also when you tell DC to follow the comics, they follow them exactly. I don't want to see the same stories told again and again and again, just in different mediums. I would like a new story. I always enjoyed DC Elseworlds stories. I was sorry when they decided to discontinue the Elseworlds line. And if the DC Cinematic Universe ends up being this fantastic Elseworlds story, I couldn't be happier, as long as it's fantastic. That's the operative word there. But we'll see how this turns out. I'm surprised Gal Gadot would reveal such a thing. Maybe she just wants to temper our expectations. But again, I'm curious to what you think. Now, the reason I said I'm just going to combine two stories into one is because while Wonder Woman will not fly, it looks like Carol Danvers will, aka Captain Marvel. One of you pointed out to me that she's included in a recent Avengers toy pack over at the Disney store, of all places, and clearly, as you can see from her figure, she can fly. That is a great choice. I think that Captain Marvel is a space character. How can she not fly? And while you have Superman flying over in the DC Cinematic Universe, there aren't a lot of people who fly in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. You've got basically just Iron Man. Thor throws himself around. And then you have Ultron can fly, and then obviously Vision will be able to fly as well. Not a lot of flyers, though. So to add some more aerial support to with Captain Marvel, I think would be really visually interesting. Oh, of course, Falcon can fly as well, but that's with the help of an apparatus, but doesn't make it any less cool. I like Falcon quite a bit. As you might have heard me talk about yesterday, I watched Captain America: The Winter Soldier on Monday night, and Anthony Mackie did a fantastic job. But of course, Carol Danvers is also from the Air Force. She's a military person like Steve Rogers and Sam Wilson. They're not Air Force, but giving Carol Danvers a situation where she can fly and can fire heavy artillery, her energy blasts, really just makes her a human member of the Air Force. So I like that. I think it plays into her background very well. And I'm very excited to see how she interacts with, Cap and Falcon, because they are all cut from the same cloth. And I think it would be really great to shine a spotlight on a female soldier, female members of the military, and what they're like. Now, the other thing I want to discuss here is that, of course, there's a very big rumor that came out yesterday that Captain Marvel has already been cast. Take this with a grain of salt, hasn't really been confirmed. I believe it comes from Latino Review. Latino Review is a little fast and loose with their rumors, but still it's too big to ignore. And the word is that it's been cast, and that Carol Danvers will make an appearance in Age of Ultron. I would guess she will show up as an Air Force pilot and will not yet have her powers, especially because she's not showing up in Guardians of the Galaxy 2, as James Gunn has recently said. They might twist his arm and be like, you blabbed about Marvel not going to Comic-Con, put Carol Danvers in your movie. But I don't think there's room for Carol Danvers in Guardians of the Galaxy 2. I don't want to see her there. Maybe you'll see her come into her own in Infinity War or during Civil War. And then, of course, she has her own movie, which is a little further out thanks to Spider-Man, but it's coming. So I think that, here's the thing. If it's cast, I think that's interesting. But I think that, as some people have been pointing out, since Age of Ultron opens early overseas in Europe, or wherever it opened early, it doesn't open day and date everywhere. So we're not all going to get surprised at once. As soon as one person sees Age of Ultron, they're going to take to Twitter and say who is cast as Captain Marvel. So I see no reason to make that a surprise during the movie because it's going to be ruined for everyone. There's no way you can keep that a secret long enough for everyone to get the joy of being like, who's it, what it? While they watch the movie. It's just not going to happen. So I think that the last minute they should reveal it as a great push to maybe get people who are somehow still on the fence about seeing Age of Ultron to go see Age of Ultron. Now, I am really hoping, I am praying to the Marvel comic book movie gods, Kevin Feige in other words, that it is Emily Blunt. Emily Blunt's been asked a lot about Black Widow lately. She's been quite gracious. Hopefully that's because she's like, I'm going to be Carol Danvers, so who cares? I really hope that that is who they cast. I would be happy with Rosamund Pike or Charlize Theron as well. But I would not be happy with Katie Sackhoff. I know a number of you are like, oh, please let it be Katie Sackhoff. And I respect your fandom for Katie Sackhoff, especially because she's played a pilot before. But I think that Katie Sackhoff is too similar to Scarlett Johansson. Same with a lot of people saying they would like to see Jennifer Lawrence in the role. And there's also a lot of you saying yesterday, oh, well, maybe she's not going to be Mystique anymore because she's going to be Carol Danvers. I don't think that's the case. I think that Jennifer Lawrence very clearly wants out of the franchise business, and she does not want to make more movies like that. I think she feels she's done her time. And the fact that she even thinks of that as time is, we don't want her in these franchises because of that, is my opinion as a fan of them. Let her go and make the movie she wants to make. Let her learn that you need to be in a franchise, and then she can maybe come back and be Mystique or find another franchise. She's just so iconic in the roles that she does have. I think that it would be hard for her to take on yet another role. It would be more like Harrison Ford, which is not a bad comparison for Jennifer Lawrence, by the way. She should feel pretty nice about that. But, even when he took on eventually the Jack Ryan movies, he still was just basically Harrison Ford. And I think that's why Jack Ryan isn't as strong a brand as Han Solo and Indiana Jones. But anyway, I think that both Katie Sackhoff and Jennifer Lawrence are just too similar to Scarlett Johansson. And I really want Carol Danvers. I'd be happy if it was Elizabeth Banks. She's one of the first people I thought would be good for the role. But I don't want Carol Danvers to be like Black Widow. I want different types of women to be represented in these movies. Just like, I think even though I have trouble relating to Katniss sometimes, I love the fact that Katniss is a very distinct type of person. And I think that there are all different types of people out there, men and women, and there are different ways to show strength and courage, and I think that should be explored in superhero movies. So I don't want every woman to have, tough as nails and a lot of bravado. And I love what Scarlett Johansson has created, but I don't think that means someone else should copy that. I think someone should go in a completely they should fly in the opposite direction. So I'm curious to what you think of this. What do you think of Carol Danvers flying and Wonder Woman not flying? And who would you like to see cast as Carol Danvers? Very interesting story indeed. All right, so that's the first story that I rolled into one. The second story is Leviathan. I hinted at this yesterday, and some of you were like, please, somebody tell me what Leviathan is. Well, allow me to illuminate you. Leviathan is a short film, an animated short film, by the way, that looks phenomenal. I put a link below in the video description where you can watch it, that was put out on the internets to get attention. And it got attention. It got quite a bit of attention. It got so much attention that it served its purpose in getting a movie deal for those attached to the project. Now, it's a filmmaker from Ireland. I have his name down here. It's Rory Robinson. And Rory Robinson is actually Oscar nominated for Best Animated Short back in 2002. So obviously he's been kicking around for over a decade, unable to get more work, and he really wants to get a feature film already. So he's teamed up with a screenwriter, Jim Uhls, who wrote Fight Club, for this project they're calling Leviathan, the Leviathan. And what it is it's being pitched as Moby Dick in space. And in the far future, I think it's like the 22nd century or something, man travels through space, to distant space. And the reason that man is able to do that, I'm saying mankind, obviously, is that mankind has found a natural resource that allows, super fast space travel. And that natural resource has to be mined from these space whales. I think it comes from their eggs. It's like, whoa, you just made it grosser. But anyway, obviously it's taking the whole whaling industry, because they needed the whale blubber to create, oil for, lights and etc. It's the exact same situation basically, but they're just doing a really great job of, putting it in the context of a sci-fi context, which I think allows for potentially some great commentary. And they've layered even more onto that, and that often they say those that have to go and hunt these space whales for this natural resource are involuntary labor. So you have slave labor. So that's very interesting as well. And I think, obviously you can do a lot of interesting storytelling about the horrible aspects of slave labor. But then also, I think with the audience, it puts them in a position of like, what if I was drafted into having to hunt, space whales? What would it be like? And the moviegoers were like, well, this was what it would be like. And I think it's a very, very strong pitch. And I'm surprised they needed to create this video to get the pitch sold. I suspect the reason they had to create the video is because the pitch could sell, but not with Rory Robinson attached. They'd be like, that's awesome. Let me go call up Christopher Nolan or Ridley Scott. Thank you, Rory, for that great idea. Here's your paycheck, go home. So he didn't want to go home. So he made this short film. It's, again, animated, incredibly well done, and really good world building right off the bat. It gets kind of cliche towards the end. I mean, anyone who's ever seen a movie knows where that space whale is at the end. It's like, apparently you guys don't watch movies in the future because it's really obvious what's happening here. Or apparently you're also all new to fishing, because this is also a common occurrence with any kind of fishing for large animals, or sea mammals, etc., etc. But I thought that I really liked that it was a return to like the grossness and dirtiness of space. Space often is depicted as being really clean and awesome, whereas we all know that anything that's an industrial endeavor, that's not the case. So I really like the choices that were made, and I like that it was. I would say that I would also pitch this thematically or visually as Alien meets How to Train Your Dragon, and that's a great pitch. That's a really, really good pitch. So again, they made this short so that they could stay attached to the project, and it looks like so far, to a large extent, they are. But this is who picked it up. It was picked up by Simon Kinberg, our X-Men writer extraordinaire, also involved with Fantastic Four, also working on Star Wars. The guy's on fire, really strong sci-fi roots, so he's come on board. And also Neil Blomkamp, who wrote Chappie, loved Chappie, directed Chappie. I think Neil Blomkamp might be a little gun-shy lately because Chappie was so poorly received by most, the majority. But, Neil, don't lose hope. There are a number of us who still think you're a genius, including me. So I think it's really good that two story guys picked this up because, again, as I said, the short gets a little cliche towards the end, and I think that while clearly Rory Robinson is a great director, or so far seems like a great director, and who knows what Jim Wools has worked on so far. He certainly has a good resume with Fight Club on it. I think it's good to get these sci-fi, world building, creative people on this with Kinberg and Blomkamp. So that's fantastic. They're hoping to set it up at Fox where Kinberg has a deal, but they imagine that if Fox passes, remember we've discussed this with distributors before, if the people who have first dibs on your projects pass, you're free to take it anywhere. And I think they feel good that they can get this picked up anywhere. But what I want to tell you about that's really important here also is that while it's wonderful that they got this movie deal off of this, it's important to have a dose of reality here. Today's morning movie news is a DC Cinematic Universe movie, and that's that Rory Robinson, because he is an Oscar-nominated director for animation, etc., he's repped. He has Hollywood representation already. He's at William Morris Endeavor and some management company called 42. So the guy's got people already in Hollywood. So take this success story with a grain of salt. I think on the surface it might seem, guy makes an animated video, puts it out on the internet, gets a movie deal. But you really need to be aware that he already had representation, which were able to field these calls, probably put the calls out, because this isn't that viral a video. It did very well, and people responded nicely to it, but we're going to talk about a much more viral video momentarily. But still, they was able to get enough attention that I'm sure that his Robinson and Wools management and agents called up Kinberg and Blomkamp and other producers and said, hey, you want this? It's hot, and got the ball rolling. And that's why the deal was able to happen relatively quickly. So keep that in mind, and still to this day in Hollywood, while it's a free agent, situation, you need an agent to be a free agent. It's complicated. All right, so that's the second story of the day, and I urge you to check out that short. And also, if you think it makes a good movie, I really, really think it's very promising. And also, Robinson and Wools aren't out of the water yet. They could totally have themselves written out. They could have the whole thing rewritten by Blomkamp and Kinberg. And also, Blomkamp and Kinberg could say, we love you, Robinson. We're going to give you a story credit, but we want someone else to direct or to co-direct with you. Oh, and finally, I think it just points out how good animation has become. That this pretty much looks live action, right? I mean, it's very impressive. And we'll see. We have to get out of the uncanny valley problem, but as motion capture acting becomes better and better, you might see more and more movies that are almost entirely digital that are sold as live action, like the upcoming Warcraft. Alright, so the third story of the day is Key and Peele. Some of you were very excited about this, and I think it's really great to see some more black talent, comedic talent, get on the board outside of Kevin Hart. There are other black comedians working, obviously, but Kevin Hart is the biggest name in the biz right now, like Eddie Murphy, Richard Pryor level, and now Key and Peele, I think, are trying to get in the game as well. I think the comedy field is very big. You've got women in it now, and now I think it's great to get some more diversity in terms of ethnicity. So very exciting for them to get this movie deal. They already have a movie deal. This isn't the first movie deal for Key and Peele. They have a film called Keanu, which is going to start shooting in this spring, and it's about a cat they have named Keanu, who runs away and is stolen by criminal elements. So Key and Peele have to pose as drug dealers, of course they do, to get the cat back. And also, by the way, let's see here. Keegan-Michael Key recently appeared. I can't believe off the top of my head I'm forgetting the movie that he was in. Oh yes, Let's Be Cops, and he was pretty good in that movie in Let's Be Cops. I thought that was pretty good. Let's Be Cops was surprisingly fun, as you might recall from my review, even though I thought it was very socially irresponsible, but still a fun movie. So anyway, they already have that film that they're working on, but they just got another movie picked up by Paramount. This is based on a viral video that they've had. I'll also put a link to this in the video description, and this had 72 million views to date. So that's pretty solid, and certainly shows an interest in the character that they want to get out there. And it's the Substitute Teacher sketch, for those of you who are familiar with their show on Comedy Central. So basically the setup is that Keegan-Michael Key plays a substitute teacher from the inner city. But today he's substituting in a white suburban school. So he has the same aggressive, attitude of shutting down misbehavior, even though perhaps the students don't warrant it. Or maybe perhaps they do sometimes. I think it's an interesting and funny setup, and I think it also shows for a diverse cast, which will cast a wider net for demographics to bring into the movie. So I think it's a very smart idea. And then who will Jordan Peele play? Peele will play another student at the school who wants to be a favorite to the student. So he's a little bit like a kiss up to the student body, and he sees this new teacher, the substitute teacher, as a rival. So it's going to be written by some producers on the show, and I don't watch Key and Peele, by the way, on Comedy Central, but I am very familiar with their work, or pretty familiar, because they do so many guest stars, and they have so many supporting roles in other properties. For instance, they were on Fargo. I really liked them on Fargo, actually. And Keegan-Michael Key showed up in Horrible Bosses 2 in a small little role as one of the talk show hosts at the beginning of the movie. So they're definitely on Hollywood's radar. They're paying their dues. They're working their way up. But what I think is interesting, and the reason I mentioned the Fargo bit is not only because they did it, but because I think they're pretty strong dramatic actors, too. I think they're funny, but they weren't out of place in a more of a quirky drama, let's say. So I think that they could be used in a lot of really interesting ways going forward, whereas I think Kevin Hart is almost entirely a comedic actor. Not to say maybe he doesn't have hidden depths that haven't been mined yet, but right now I'm not seeing it. But I see a lot of versatility in Key and Peele and the kind of projects they can work on. So I hope they find success here, but then I'm interested to see what they do going forward. I put them less in the camp of, like, Will Ferrell's tried to do serious work, and he's pretty good, but I'm talking more like Jim Carrey, Robin Williams, Steve Carell, those comedians that are able to do like actual, full-on drama as well as comedy. And I see Key and Peele in that wheelhouse. So I'm curious to what you think. Are you a fan of the Substitute Teacher sketch? Do you think it can be made into a full movie? And do you think that Key and Peele have what it takes to eventually get to the level of Kevin Hart or Robin Williams or Jim Carrey or Steve Carell? All right, so those are the three stories of the day, and we're going to circle back to Warner Brothers, DC versus Disney Marvel for the viewer question. And this one comes from Darius Watkins, who says, "Hello, Grace. I've been watching BTT for a couple of years. Awesome! And I love it." Oh, that makes me feel so nice, Darius. I hope you're enjoying today's episode. But Darius says, "But I have a question. Why is there so much competition between Marvel and DC fans? When there's movie news, there's always a war in the comments section. I love them both, but all the hollering gets irritating. Love to hear your opinion on this, and keep up the great work, Darius Watkins." Great question, Darius, and I think it's very true. And I think that the reason that there's so much fighting is because There can only be one winner. They're so different in the way they approach their properties, Marvel and DC. By the way, it's interesting that there are these fights because I think most people do read both Marvel and DC. I read both Marvel and DC. I think actually, in my opinion, it would be rare to find a comic book reader who only read from one of the big two. And I think people more often have favorite characters over publishers. For instance, my two favorite character groups are Batman and X-Men. I've got my Marvel favorites, I've got my DC favorites. And I think that both are capable of putting out great stuff, and both are capable of putting out crappy stuff. We call them on their successes, and we congratulate them on their successes, and we call them on their failures. But I think that the reason there's so much fighting is because they're so uneven at this point. And it's like sports teams. Everybody likes to see their team doing the best. And I guess, you have an affinity towards one. I don't, by the way. I'm tired of seeing DC fail. I want to see them have some wins. And so I'm very hopeful for what they have coming up. And I think the Suicide Squad movie is shaping up a little bit better as things go on. As I said, Jai Courtney was pretty good in Insurgent, so, who knows what could happen if that happened, right? Anything's possible now. But I just think that it's really like sporting events. And some people, and even in sports, some people are like, I like all the teams. I just enjoy watching the game, the love of the game, and, the sportsmanship on the field. There's that sports fan. And then there's a sports fan who's like, I hate that other team. I want to see them crushed into the ground, and I'm going to go pick a fight with their fan over there. It's just the way sometimes people enjoy certain things. And I think that, while it might seem like there's animosity, I think people are having fun with the DC or Marvel hate. It's just, again, the way they enjoy the situation and the setup. And so I think that kind of, arguing is like part of the experience. So I think as long as people are just don't go too far and they don't make people feel unwelcome, it's just people trash talking. So I think it's important to distinguish between the trash talking and just the people who genuinely are unhinged and, for some reason are threatened by fictional characters from either one of the two sides. But, I say that, but it's the end of the day, there are very real consequences here in terms of box office, in terms of prestige, and I think that's, a lot of that's how we're judging them as well. Who's getting the most awards, and for a while there it wasn't so bad because Christopher Nolan was getting a lot of box office and a lot of critical recognition for the DC cinematic universe, or it wasn't a cinematic universe at that point, but for DC movies, so I think there was less of a situation at that point. But I think what's fueling it is that DC is fumbling so badly. The team is having a bad run. And so I think that not only is it hard for DC fans to watch that happen, but it's no fun to watch everyone call them on it and point it out to them and be like, wow, that was horrible. Your team just crashed and burned. Do they even know how to play this game? And nobody likes to hear that about something they love. So I think that once DC perhaps steps up their game and gets a little bit more of an even playing field, on an even playing field with Marvel, some of this animosity might die down. So that's my answer to your question, Darius. I hope that sheds a little light on it and will allow you to not at least feel that some of the comments aren't so irritating. All right, so thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in. Again, I hope you liked the stories that were picked today. If the story you wanted to see covered was not mentioned, please write about it down below, and I will be sure to get to it later this week. And, of course, let me know if there are any questions that you would like me to answer. Thank you so much, and I look forward to discussing this with you down below, and thanks for watching. Bye.